The mighty ancient Egyptians are a civilization that most people know very little about, despite the fact that they lived 5,000 years ago in what is now Egypt. They created an empire that stretched from the Middle East to North Africa. It all started around 3100 BC, when two separate kingdoms, Upper and Lower Egypt, were united by a king named Narmer. This is traditionally seen as the beginning of ancient Egyptian civilization. Over the next few centuries, Egypt became a powerful force in the region, conquering Nubia to the south and the Levant to the east. By 332 BC, the empire had declined and was conquered by Alexander the Great. After his death, Egypt came under the rule of the Greek Ptolemaic dynasty until it was eventually incorporated into the Roman Empire. But despite the decline of their empire, the Egyptians left behind a legacy that would influence the world for millennia. As we mentioned earlier, the Egyptians were innovative and they were able to develop new technologies that helped them improve their way of life. But this also made them vulnerable to outside influences. When new ideas and technologies were introduced to Egypt, such as the iron plow and the chariot, the Egyptians were quick to adopt them. However, this also led to social and economic upheaval, as the old ways of doing things were replaced by new ones. At its peak, the Egyptian empire stretched from the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, and from Sudan to Israel. The Egyptians were already a hierarchical society, but the introduction of new technologies only made it worse. But in the end, it just wasn't enough. The forces of change were too strong, and the Egyptians were ultimately swept away. The gap between the rich and the poor grew wider, and the chances of social mobility decreased. Eventually, this would lead to unrest and the overthrow of the government. In fact, many of Egypt's greatest monuments, such as the pyramids and the Sphinx, were built during a time of great social upheaval. Yet there is no evidence that the Egyptians ever used wheeled vehicles. They didn't need wheels. With a population of over 10 million people and a workforce of over 4 million, they were able to move huge blocks of stone by using levers, rollers, and ramps. And unlike the Mesopotamians, they didn't have to worry about invading armies. They were isolated by natural barriers, such as the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea, and the Libyan Desert. And they left behind a legacy that continues to influence the world today. But how did they do it? What was the secret to their success? Well, part of it was thanks to the Nile River, which provided the Egyptians with a reliable source of water and fertile land for farming. The Egyptians were some of the first people in the world to develop new technologies that made their lives easier and their empire stronger. The pharaoh was considered the head of both the religious and political system, but he wasn't a tyrant. He had a council of advisors to help him make decisions, and there were several checks and balances in place to prevent him from becoming too powerful. The Egyptians also developed a sophisticated legal code that was based on the concept of ma'at, or truth and justice. For example, they invented the plow, which helped them farm more efficiently. This code of laws protected the rights of the weak and the poor, and ensured that the pharaoh and his officials were held accountable for their actions. They developed a system of writing, which allowed them to keep records, communicate, and spread their culture. And they built great works of engineering, such as the pyramids and the Sphinx, which remain standing today as a testament to their skill. This allowed them to grow crops like wheat and barley, which fed their large population and provided the energy they needed to build their impressive monuments and support their army. Another part of it was their strong central government, which was headed by a pharaoh who was considered a god on earth. The pharaoh was responsible for maintaining order in the empire, collecting taxes, and defending the country from invaders. But how did they keep their empire so vast? And how did their empire fall apart? But perhaps the most important part of their success was their innovative technology. Unfortunately, the Egyptians wouldn't have their empire forever. Their innovations in technology and engineering, their impressive monuments, and their unique culture continue to fascinate and inspire people today. It is hard to believe that a civilization as advanced as ancient Egypt could have been built by people who supposedly didn't even use a wheel. Well, the story of ancient Egypt is a long one, but here's a brief overview. If you want to learn more about ancient Egypt, be sure to check out our other videos on the subject. However, despite all of these advantages, ancient Egypt would eventually collapse. Here's why. For example, the introduction of the iron plow led to the development of larger farms and the enslavement of more people. They also developed a system of government that worked surprisingly well. The Egyptians weren't stupid. They knew that their empire was in trouble, and they tried everything they could to save it. We have a series of videos on the Egyptian pyramids, as well as videos on other ancient civilizations such as the Greeks and Romans. We hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. If you did, please leave us a like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss one of our videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.